Welcome everyone to Tisch College's first virtual Distinguished Speaker Series event of the semester with former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. My name is Lydia Woldiesius and I am a junior at Tufts studying political science and civic studies. I'm also the student chair of Jumbo Vote, Tufts University's student-run nonpartisan organization dedicated to promoting civic engagement and voter turnout. Tisch College has many events and speaker series visiting campus virtually this fall. You can find more information and register for them by visiting tischcollege.tufts.edu/events. I also want to remind folks that there will be an opportunity for you to ask our speaker questions during today's conversation. If you have a question or two, please submit them via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time. Tisch staff will be in touch with you directly for additional instructions, and they will do their best to get to as many of your questions as possible. And before I introduce our speakers, I want to share some information on voting resources with you on behalf of Jumbo Vote. We hope you got a chance to explore some of our resources while waiting for the event. Jumbo Vote is here as a resource for you through Election Day and beyond. Please visit our website at jumbovote.org and follow us on all of our social media at Jumbo Vote to stay up to date on all of our events and election deadlines this year. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions as you navigate this election season. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Governor Deval Patrick. Originally from the south side of Chicago, Patrick came to Massachusetts when he was 14 after winning a scholarship to Milton Academy. After attending Harvard College and Harvard Law School, he clerked for a federal appellate judge and then launched a career as an attorney and business executive, becoming a staff attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, a partner at 2 Boston law firms, and a senior executive at 2 Fortune 50 companies. In 1994, Patrick was appointed by President Bill Clinton as the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, the nation's highest civil rights post. And in 2006, after his first campaign for public office, he became the first Black governor of Massachusetts and just the second Black governor in the United States, both of which remain true today. He was also awarded an honorary degree from Tufts in 2009. During his 8 years as governor, Patrick helped to revive the economy through the expansion of affordable healthcare to more than 98% of state residents, stimulated clean energy and biotechnology in the state, steered Massachusetts to a 25-year high in unemployment, and made massive investments in our public schools. He was also an early supporter of gay marriage and worked hard to protect Massachusetts' first in the nation same-sex marriage allowance from ballot measures seeking to eliminate it. Declining to run for a third term as governor, Patrick joined Bain Capital to form Double Impact, the firm's impact investing social enterprise. And most recently, Governor Patrick was a candidate for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States, where he ran a platform of economic growth, reforming healthcare and the criminal justice system, responsible global leadership, and an accessible and functioning democracy. He dropped out of the race in February. I had the pleasure of meeting Governor Patrick in New Hampshire on the campaign trail in January, along with my classmates from the Tufts Campaign School. He was kind enough to sit down and chat with us all in a coffee shop in between campaign events. Joining Governor Patrick in conversation today is Alan Solomon, the Dean of Tisch College. Dean Solomon is no stranger to politics and public service himself. In fact, his first job after graduating from Tufts was as a community organizer in Lowell, Massachusetts. A lifelong social and political activist, Dean Solomon previously served as the U.S. ambassador to Spain and Andorra under President Obama. Before serving in Spain, Solomon chaired the bipartisan board of directors as a Corporation for National and Community Service, the federal agency that oversees domestic service programs such as AmeriCorps, Learn and Service America, Vista, and Senior Corps. Dean Solomon also served as financial chair of the Democratic Party in the late 1990s and played key roles in the presidential campaigns of John Kerry, Al Gore, Bill Clinton, Michael Dukakis, and Barack Obama. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Dean Alan Solomon and Governor Deval Patrick.
Great. Well,
thank you, Lydia. That was really generous.
Yes, thank you as well. So thank you, Lydia, for that great introduction. I assume I'm on camera and now you can hear me. I want to thank you, Lydia, especially for the great work you do for Jumbo Vote. And let me repeat, if anyone wants information about Jumbo Vote, how to vote, instructions, or how to participate, go to the website jumbovote.org or call our voting hotline, which is 617-627-VOTE. I also want to reiterate that yesterday we announced our complete lineup of fall speakers and events. So in addition to Governor Patrick today, we'll be hosting the likes of Mayor Pete Buttigieg, journalist David Gregory, Yamiche Alcindor, commentator Van Jones, Congressman Joe Kennedy, Congressman Adam Schiff, activist Latosha Brown, and many, many others. And you can learn more about the speakers at tishcollege.tufts.edu/events. But now it's my personal pleasure to welcome an old friend and fellow Tufts alum, Deval Patrick. It's great to have you, Governor.
Good to be with you, Ambassador. Thank you.
Let me start with my first question, if I may. So you had served in the federal government as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, but you'd never run for office. And then in 2006, you ran for governor of Massachusetts and you won, even though at the outset, some people didn't think you had a chance. So why did you decide to run for governor? And what was the secret to your overwhelming electoral victory?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you very much for including me in this amazing series. I listened to the other guests who you anticipate having, and I'm happy to be a warm-up act for anyone or all of them. So the decision to run for anything had to do with a frustration I saw, frankly, a bad habit that I saw in my business life creeping into the way we govern ourselves, that very kind of quarter to quarter short-term focus that I saw in a lot of particularly public companies. Sometimes I think, without due regard for the long-term interests of the enterprise, has crept, I think, into the way we govern ourselves in this country, where we govern from election cycle to election cycle, or news cycle to news cycle, and not generation to generation. We've been dodging a lot of the hard, big issues that confront us for a long time. And you could see, and I think, frankly, right now, a lot more people see the accumulated impact of that avoidance. And then I also wanted to I wanted to feel like you could run willing to lose, meaning, you could run on your convictions and not by trying to outsmart voters, by being, too clever by half, saying one thing over here and something else over there so nobody gets aroused. And I decided to run for governor because I wanted to be able to set the agenda. I wanted the agenda to be ambitious and not just be in the position of supporting somebody else's agenda or reacting to it or commenting on it. So there were a lot of people who I think quite rightly thought I couldn't win. When I won, I will tell you, my wife was surprised, but also was hoping I would lose, because she's a very, as you know, Alan, very private person. I mean, she was a phenomenal first lady, but
she was.
Her inclination is to be, and her preference is to be private. And I will tell you lovingly, or tell our guests and remind you lovingly that you were one of the people who said I couldn't win. And it has a lot to do with the fact that, and you should correct this, Alan, if you remember it differently, but we'd had 16 years of Republican governors, and Democrats in Massachusetts had said some while before anybody was thinking about me, we need to coalesce early around the candidate. Am I remembering this right?
You are remembering it perfectly.
Figured out who it ought to be a well-known and well-regarded sitting attorney general, and that's where all the attention was focused. So it was, here I came, cutting the line, and mostly what I got was it wasn't mostly mean or dismissive. It was, nice guy, you should run for something else. And for the reasons I said, I didn't want to run for something else. But after the primary, we were all together, and you were an incredible ally.
Well, you remember things correctly. I think I was the first person, or I was certainly big enough to admit I was dead wrong. You broke a lot of new ground in showing that you could run a truly grassroots campaign, get people involved in politics who had never been involved before, inspire people to have hope and confidence that government could matter to their lives. And I remember the day, it was September 19th. And I think I showed up at a meeting the next morning. So you ran a wonderful campaign. You showed a lot of other people how to run a successful campaign, and you also demonstrated how to be a successful governor. So, but then you decided to run for president of the United States, and I assume you made that decision for some of the same reasons. What was that experience for you like?
Well, interestingly, I appreciate your acknowledging I was a candidate for president, even though I was
acknowledging I was a candidate for.
Are you hearing that feedback?
Yeah,
Yeah.
It just stopped.
That I was a candidate because I was a candidate for about 15 minutes. But the year before I got in the race, when all of our friends and fellow candidates were getting in the race, I was really close, and I had thought hard about it. I'd gotten a lot of encouragement from a lot of places, publicly and privately, and from the mighty, as they say, but also from the meek. I mean, people I'd never met who were knew of my work or whom I had encountered, but they weren't office holders necessarily, all around the country. And it's no small decision, as you know well, and as anybody can imagine. And we decided to make a go of it, mostly because, as I said, there were so many big challenges that I saw, that I think we were all increasingly seeing, and because I felt like the appetite for big answers to those challenges was greater than it normally is. But then we had a date for a launch and all that stuff. I think it was about 3 weeks before my wife, Diane, was diagnosed with uterine cancer. And so we stepped back. I still think that was the right thing to do. I was at peace with that decision. She is cancer-free today. Praise God. And I was watching the race and talking to lots of candidates, as I say, who were friends of mine, and trying to be helpful from the shadows, as it were. But there came a point where it just felt to me like there wasn't, we were doing this thing, and we often do this as Democrats. We were all over each other about what, at the end of the day, are not trivial, but they are, in the scheme of things, smaller differences. We were arguing about how to get healthcare to everybody when the point is, all of us wanted everyone to have health care and the other side didn't. That's the point. And how you get there when, if there is a unanimity of view about the importance of doing that and doing that fast, there will be time later on for the debate about how to, as long as that debate isn't prolonged and unnecessary. But getting there seemed to me to be the real point. Just as an example, we were talking about variances in ways of asking everyone to contribute according to their means to building a better common future for everybody everywhere, including, and most especially, I think, in some ways, the left out and the left back. But few had actually done that sort of thing. We achieved the goals of the Paris Climate Accord in Massachusetts 7 years, I guess it's now 8 years ago. So there was something about understanding how you get some of this stuff done that seemed to be missing. But by the time I got in, really, the media and I would say, to some extent, the public had made up their minds that there were, too many candidates already, and it was just really, really hard to break through. You learn.
Well, you're making a contribution the effort today, I know. But let me just say, everyone believes that November 3rd is going to be among the most important elections ever, if not certainly the most important election in our lifetimes. And what concerns you most about this election? What advice might you have for the Biden-Harris campaign?
Well, so first of all, I do believe this is, as they say, an existential election, because if the character of the candidates is an issue in every election, this time it's the character of the country. And in many, many ways, I have wanted the Biden-Harris campaign to call that question. And I think in many respects, they have been using their own language, using Joe's own language about the soul of the nation. The policy agenda, I think, has become more ambitious since the primary ended, and I think that's important. And I think that rather than that sense of sort of nostalgia, which was, I think, sort of characterized Joe Biden's campaign before he became the nominee, and he began to talk about how we had to be about more than going back to better times under Barack Obama and Joe Biden, because, you know, frankly, everybody, including Barack Obama, understands we need more than that today. I really am. I'm reluctant, and I'm usually reluctant about giving public advice to anybody's campaign. It has to be real. It has to feel authentic, I think, for it to matter. And I spend more of my time advising, you know, regular folks to see this campaign and understand this campaign for the profoundly important one it is.
Yep.
And to make sure you have a plan to vote, which I think is important at any time, but especially during the pandemic, and that you get everyone you know to vote and to have a plan to do so. What concerns me most about the practicalities of this election is the I think growing realization we have, and I say this as a Democrat who doesn't think you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. That at the national level, anyway, the Republican Party doesn't think they could win a fair fight. And so they have been accumulating ways of cheating for more than a decade. You can talk about that if you like. And I don't think those terms are unfair. And then, of course, the president's rhetoric is not just divisive, which would be bad enough on its own, but is about discrediting the election before it happens, and that has, you know, a lot of us worried.
Well, I think a lot of young people and students in particular, and activists who are probably watching today, are feeling overwhelmed by all that's going on, including some of the efforts to suppress the votes of younger people, but also the global pandemic, the persistent racial injustice and the needless killing of Black and brown people, and the hyper-partisan political climate. What's your advice to those to students in light of what can really seem like an overwhelming climate that none of us have ever lived through before?
You know, I am so encouraged by the energy and the urgency of right now. And I guess for the students and the young activists and organizers, or just the observers who are who'd like to be more active and organized, but as you say, maybe feeling overwhelmed, I think this is the moment they made, and they should know that there are an awful lot of us are grateful that they have made this moment. Mm-hmm. And that they have allies beyond their generation.
Mhm.
I think that there's this amazing writer, Anand Giridharadas, who wrote, among other things, a book called Winners Take All, which is a critique of modern capitalism, much of which critique I agree with. And I say that as a capitalist. But I remember he gave a speech at the first summit of the Obama Foundation 4 years ago, maybe. And he mentioned this, used this line. He said, talked about how many folks describe themselves as woke nowadays. And he said that the real question is whether the woke are going to leave room for the still waking. And I think that's a profoundly important point and a piece of advice I would give. There are ways in which the economic fragility and the social isolation and the increasing despair that Black people have experienced in this country for generations are now being felt by people of all backgrounds everywhere. And the fact that we don't have so many of the usual distractions to turn us away from that during the pandemic is both an overwhelming thing and a huge opportunity, given the Americans, famously short attention span. And I think bringing that energy to bear to have an overwhelming victory for the White House, the Senate, and in the House, and then staying engaged to drive the agenda after the election will be critical. Yep. This does feel like a precarious time, but we have a lot more power among us than we may think. And we're going to have a chance to exercise that power in an organized way. And we're going to have to keep doing it after we win these elections in order to get the outcomes that we and so many others need.
Well, speaking of the power that we have, and especially the power that young people have, as you know, at Tisch College, that's an area that we study. We study the engagement of young people in both civic life and political life. And it was very encouraging in our latest polling to see that 83% of young people, 18 to 29-year-olds, said that they believe their generation has the power to change this country. And 79% said that the pandemic had shown them how important politics is in their daily lives. So that may well be the silver lining, that this has been a teaching moment where young people are learning that their votes matter.
Yes.
Contrary to some of the stereotypes. But if we can follow up a little bit on the issue of race and some of the things you've talked about, your experience as a Black man. In a television interview following the killing of George Floyd, you said that racism has always been white people's problems. It's not Black people's problems. Can you elaborate on that, if I got the quote correct?
Yeah, I mean, the impact falls on us, but overcoming it is up to white people. I mean, it's amazing. The number of calls from CEOs and other business leaders. I was talking with a prominent Black business leader about this not too long after the George Floyd videotaped lynching was broadcast. That from people checking on how we were doing, and you knew which ones were checking to see how we were doing versus which ones were checking to see how they were doing, meaning they wanted to be reassured that they were, good people and in the good camp. There's the term that's used now around anti-racism, which is the affirmative steps that you take to be self-aware, to be self-conscious, to build bridges. I for a long time, you know, I remember reflecting on this when I was at Justice at the Civil Rights Division. We have made our uneasy peace in this country with anti-discrimination laws.
Mhm.
We have never made our peace with actual integration. What does it actually mean to live and work and play and go to school and love across all kinds of differences? What does that actually mean? What does it actually look like in your own daily life? And, you know, because I have, you know, I have taken that chance in my own life in a variety of ways. It doesn't unsettle me as much as it does many people, but I am very aware how much risk is involved. Just what a big chance that is, that, you know, somebody you think is your pal, and then they, you know, you have an argument and all of a sudden somebody calls you a name you never thought would come out of their mouths, or it's some micro version of this, and all kinds of things on the spectrum in between. It's complicated, but, you know, the human beings are rich and complex and marvelous creatures, and if you have the you know, emotional fortitude and patience to build those bridges, and I think those bridges can be bridges to glorious things in relationships. But, you know, there's a whole lot of pain one has to be prepared for. So when I say what I said, it is, you know, enough already with asking us to make you feel comfortable before we can have any conversation. You know, what are you doing, you know, to come part way in my direction? And how do you make it, work? How do you deal with your own suppositions? And I'll give you a concrete example, Alan. I won't prolong this because, you know, we've talked about this offline a lot over the years. Through our own and our families' relationships, but there's a fantastic young doctor over at Mass General Hospital who was telling me about their search for a senior official in the senior executive or manager in the ranks over there, and how the job description had been circulated among a number of other senior managers to make sure they got it right. And that and it, you know, looked right. And they talked about the importance of a diverse slate and what have you. And they got to the bottom and said, you know, one of the qualifications was tenured professorship at a major medical school. Well, I mean, all of a sudden that constrains the size of the pool. And then when asked, why do we have this requirement? The answer was, well, we've always had that requirement. And that's kind of a almost, you know, trite example of the work that has to be done. We have to re-examine many of the assumptions that we have made about readiness, about worth, about economics and entitlement and achievement and merit.
Yep. Well, I think part of the experience of being woke is, first of all, trying to understand that, and also trying to find in our own responsibility what we can do to improve a situation that I think, you know, we are painfully aware is something that we've not dealt with for too long.
Well, you know, I would take it even further and just say on my own behalf, I am not woke. I start there not because I don't think I'm woke or I wish I were, but because I want to bring the humility necessary to be taught.
Yes.
And I think you have to put your defenses down before you start. And I think that for many white people I know is really hard.
Well, what I hope people are hearing and you're modeling is both your humility, but also your optimism, your faith in human beings and what we can do, despite sort of the pain and the challenges we face. Let me ask you one more question, and then I'm going to turn to some students. But you're doing, as I mentioned earlier, some great work now to contribute to the conversation, to contribute to the effort. You started something called the Together Fund, and maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that and how you're trying to make a difference yourself in the current campaigns.
So Together Fund is a platform for me to help with Biden-Harris campaign, with a bunch of Senate and House candidates who are running in places where Democrats haven't always competed or competed successfully. And my experience in Doug Jones's special election 3 years ago, and then in the midterms, working in similar sorts of settings with terrific progressive candidates, is that we have a pretty good case and a pretty appealing case to make everywhere when we start neighbor to neighbor and at the grassroots, rather than as a kind of a totem for the party. And I say that as a loyal Democrat, but there's much more about the engagement of people who've been left out and left back, who are sometimes voters or sometimes, occasional voters who see themselves as reliable Democrats, maybe Republicans, or frankly aren't buying 100% of what either party is selling, which, by the way, is most people.
Yes, it is.
And so we've also identified and are supporting grassroots groups that are working alongside or in the same jurisdictions, if you will, as the candidates we've endorsed, because of my rock solid belief in the importance of organizing at the grassroots, neighbor to neighbor and in a relational way, and asking people to see their stake in their own civic and political future. And so I'm excited about that. The only frustrating thing is I have to do it all this way by Zoom, instead of being out on the ground and feeling it a little bit more, which is how I get, I think, my best intelligence.
Well, I guess we're all learning to adjust, and there are some upsides. We made it possible for you to join us today, all the way from the Berkshires. So I'm going to now recognize a couple of students who I think have questions for you. I would just ask each of you to please identify yourself with your name, the year you're in, and which school you're at of Tufts, and just ask one brief question. And remember, a question has a question mark at the end. But we'll start with Katya, I believe.
Hi.
Katya, how are you?
I'm good. Nice
It's wonderful to see you.
You too.
Do they know about us?
I don't think so.
Our oldest daughter babysat for Katya for years. We know her family and her parents, and it's wonderful to see you. Look at you, all grown up.
Yeah. So yes, I'm Katya. I'm a master's student in the biology department at Tufts. And my question is, what is the most important thing you learned or a main takeaway from your 2020 presidential campaign?
Well, I often make the point, Katya, about the importance of humility. I will say it was a humbling experience. Nothing beats preparation. And while I accept that being a candidate or being in office is, part substance and part performance art. I accept reluctantly how much of it has become performance art. And I don't really know what quite to make of that in the end. So I'm, I guess if I want to do this, I have to be a better performer, something like that. But definitely when I ran for governor, Katya, the campaign was, I think, 19 months long. And it wasn't until the last maybe 4, Alan, would you say, that anybody paid any attention? And I remember being maybe the last 5 months that anybody paid any attention. And I remember being incredibly frustrated by that at the time. But on reflection, I realized what an advantage it was to organize that way out of the glare of constant commentary and critique, just to build and build and build and practice, so that when primetime came, we were ready. And I can see even more so on a much larger scale the value of time in a big and complex country like this, where the media won't give you the time of day, and in some respects just couldn't, because they were themselves overwhelmed.
Thank you. Next student questioner. Okay, I'm going to ask, oh, here we go. Nick, excuse me. Go ahead.
Hey, Nick, you're on mute. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
I can. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for your time. I
You.
really appreciate hearing from you. My name is Nick Falkson. I'm a second semester public health student at Tufts. Attended Tufts undergrad, graduated in 2018. And
better hurry up and graduate, man, and get out there, because we need you.
I'm working on it. But I'm 24 years old, working full-time, part-time student. And, one question I have for you is, what advice would you have for, a 24-year-old like myself and like many of the other students who are listening on this call who want to go out there and change the world?
Well, first of all, believe you can. Cynicism is a poison widely available in American politics, has been for a long time, and maybe less so now. Maybe it might be, Nick, that you and so many of the others I've been watching on TV or talking to on the phone by Zoom in the last few months are the antidote to that cynicism. But there is a long view, kind of back to something I was saying in response to one of Alan's early questions, this notion of generational responsibility, that you take a long view, that you understand that the changing of the world is not going to be by a flip of the switch, which does not mean you shouldn't bring urgency to it, right? You can count on two hands the number of years we have before climate change is irreversible, to the meaning, that the Earth is no longer habitable. We have been way, way too incremental in dealing with chronic poverty and its sources in systemic or structural racism and disadvantage. And there isn't a single problem we face that we didn't make, which is to say that there isn't a problem that ought to be beyond our capacity to care about and to solve. So I guess what I'm trying to say is keep the faith and keep pushing. And by the way, whatever you choose to do, if I may add, whatever you choose to do, whether it's be a public health champion or work in an investment bank, don't ever feel like you have to leave your conscience at the door. Bring your conscience to your work and your decisions, and everything you do will contribute to changing the world.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All the best.
We have another question from Athena.
Athena?
Hi, yes, I'm
Hi.
Athena. Thank you so much for coming on, and it's just so wonderful to get to hear your wisdom. And I'm just very grateful for all the work that you've done in Massachusetts.
In your school, Athena?
Yeah, I'm Athena. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a sophomore at Tufts undergrad. I'm majoring in psychology and sociology. And my question is, right now, especially with the pandemic, there have been so many issues highlighted, that so many problems to face and solve. And I'm wondering both what you think the most urgent issues are and how you think we should solve them. Because there's protesting, there's voting, there's lobbying, and what are the issues and how can we solve them from your perspective?
Well, that's such an impossible question. So I guess, Athena, I'm going to take your question, intended or not, as a question of in what order to solve them, rather than which. Because I've mentioned some, and there are others. There's climate change. There's economic mobility. There's wealth and job creation, especially for marginalized people. It's how not to have people marginalized. I said I'm a capitalist, but I'm not a market fundamentalist. I don't think markets solve every problem that needs to be solved right on time and in always the most just way. And I think we need to rethink the way capitalism is practiced in the United States. But I would say, had I won, my number one objective, back to the importance of a broad civic engagement and to the truth, which I will say, and everyone else already knows, that neither I nor anyone has a corner, or any party for that matter, has a corner on all the best ideas. We have to have a functioning democracy in which people can participate meaningfully. And so, pulling down all of these different barriers to registration and voting, limiting the impact of money, so much of it dark in our politics today, the way lobbying. I remember we moved a bottle bill early. Alan, you won't remember this, but a bottle bill early in my administration, because as a part of a whole bunch of things we were doing around environmental actions and movement to a greener future. And it went down in flames. And I remember there's a colleague of mine, former colleague of mine from Coca-Cola, who called and said, you knew you were never good. You should have known you would never win that issue. And I said, why do you say? And this was a friend. He said, because we have more money than you do. And I understood exactly what he was saying. And so do you. And that's wrong. So this notion that we are, always or so often deferring to capital. And when I say that, I mean, not necessarily because it's a fair argument of ideas in every case, but because you can't compete when when so many of the tools for democracy have been stacked on one side. And that's been happening over a long time. Bill Moyers, the late Bill Moyers, absolutely wonderful reporter and writer and commentator, said in a speech I was at a few years ago that there were, I think the number is 26 individuals who were convicted and served time for offenses in connection with the Watergate scandal. And he said, not one of the things they were convicted for is illegal today. Not one.
my God.
So this is something we've been drifting toward breaking our democracy for a long time. You know, everything from hyper partisan gerrymandering to the burdens on registration, on in the purging, which is the removal of registered voters from the voting rolls. In Wisconsin, in the primary this year, ostensibly because of the pandemic, the number of polling places in Milwaukee went from 145 to 5. And most of those polling places that were closed were in neighborhoods where Black and brown people live. So, you know, there is so much more we can do if we are serious about being a democracy. And I think being serious about being a democracy, a representative democracy, needs to be job one.
Thank you. We have time, I think, for 2 more brief questions. So I'm going to call on Matt, and then we're going to end with a very special questioner.
Hi, Governor Patrick. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. It was really great to hear your wisdom and your personal stories in politics. I'm an undergrad student in the School of Arts and Sciences. I'm a member of the class of 2022. And my question is, in the wake of disturbing incidents of violence against people of historically marginalized identities, notably the brutal killing of Ahmaud Arbery, there's been a recent push to pass enhanced hate crime legislation in states like Georgia, Arkansas, South Carolina. Do you think that passing harsher penalties for hate crimes is an effective tool for combating such crimes, or do you think legislators need to proceed with caution about strengthening hate crimes laws because of the potential for those laws to be enforced disproportionately against the very people they're meant to protect?
I hear that. I've heard that question before. I think where I would come down, Matt, is even so in favor of aggravating the penalty or enhancing the penalty for a hate-related crime. And most of the crimes were crimes already, notwithstanding the motivation. But I do. What concerns me is a little different from what you're getting at. I think what concerns me is that legislators will think, if we pass this, we're done. We don't have to do anything else. You know, just to step back for a minute. I had my security clearance was still pretty high after I left office. And I remember getting a briefing after the 2016 election about the extent of Russian involvement and just how systematic it was and how persistent it was, how they had practiced in Brexit and with Brexit. And I remember being struck not just by the extent of the interference and the attempt to divide us, but how easy it was. And I still reflect on that. And I think it's easy because we don't know each other. You know, there is no justification for those yahoos who chased Ahmaud Arbery and jogging down the street and shot him. And there are versions of that a lot of people have heard about, and a few people have seen in their in videotapes and so forth. But many, many more that people have lived, including the presumption of dangerousness, the presumption of incompetence, go on down the list. And that's an easy thing to do if you don't know anything other than the cartoon version of others. It's one of the reasons why I really feel strongly about national service. I think I wish we had a version of Israel's mandatory service. I mean, I don't think it'll ever happen here. I'm not talking about it having to be in the military, by the way. But we have so many unmet needs. And the idea, and we did, by the way, before the pandemic. I mean, think about having a core of people who were helping us surmount the pandemic right now. But the idea of having those needs met by people who are working alongside others from other regions or other experiences that are different from their own, and making that realistically possible for people by paying a living wage, by providing benefits, including healthcare and childcare and what have you. And not just for young people, frankly, I'd love it for folks who were mid-career or who were unemployed or what have you, so they could, have an opportunity to learn a skill to kind of get a sense of their personal, sort of get their own stuff together before moving on to the next thing. And I think that just the experience, and I say this from personal experience, of learning people below the surface you thought you knew them, and having them learn you back is a pretty important thing in terms of how it influences how you think about the news, how you interact with other people, and right back to that question about that point about presumptions.
We're going to have one more questioner, and we're honored to be joined by a distinguished Tufts alumna and also a member of the Board of Trustees, Diane Hessen. Diane, pleasure to have you.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Governor.
How are you?
Alum and always a student. Thank you for coming to Tufts.
It's good to be.
I also need to say I think you would make an extraordinary president of the United States, and I hope you're going to run again next time.
Oh man, one thing at a time.
My question is about business and private equity. When Mitt Romney, founder of your firm, Bain Capital, was running for president, he really got hammered by the Obama campaign, which I thought was a great thing at the time.
Yeah. For
being a vulture capitalist and outsourcing American jobs and generally not understanding government.
Yeah.
So now that you're on the other side, do you think the Democrats were unfair to Romney on that point? And what have you learned? What can you tell us about private equity that you didn't know before you became a part of it?
Yeah, so I'm not there anymore. You have to step away to run, and I haven't. And you can't have a deal about going back. And I'm not going to confront any of that until after this cycle, because I want to be helpful now. But I said at the time what I knew to be true, which is that there's a right way and a wrong way to do everything. And I am very wary of false choices. I mentioned earlier, this notion that you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat, that you have to hate police to believe Black Lives Matter. That you have to hate business to be a social justice warrior. I mean, none of that in my life's experience is true. One of the things that I wanted to show with the fund that we founded at Bain Capital was that you could do measurable social or environmental good and create a financial return. In fact, turns out for us, a top quintile financial return, that it's a false choice. I mean, Diane, you know that from your own work, your own business career, but you have to be conscious, you have to be intentional. And so I think that the notion of back to the short-termism I was talking about earlier, the notion of, buying some company on the cheap and squeezing all of the wages down to next to nothing and pushing everybody out and loading it up with debt and then spinning it back out into the market for sale at an inflated price on the theory that it's a more efficient company. has been shown over and over again to be at best a short-term strategy. That was not the strategy of most of what I saw in private equity or what I had seen before. The best of those strategies was about making a going concern a stronger concern. My biggest concern today apart from my additional concern, apart from those, is who gets access to that capital. How do you know about it? How do you, we met any number. Actually, the very first deal we invested in was a company called Sundial Brands, which makes Shea Moisture and Nubian Heritage bath and body products. It was built by a Liberian American and his best friend, and they came over to Babson, I think, for their MBA. And Mom came over for graduation, and while they were here, there was a coup at home, and they couldn't go home. And so they said to her, "Well, what do we do now?" And she said, "Well, you just got your MBA, start a company." And they built this amazing company, very intentional about the supply chain. They source from women's cooperatives in West Africa, and they cut out the middleman so that to raise the standard of living and the return for the suppliers. Just as an example, very, very intentional all the way along. And when they were looking for capital, they quite happened to find somebody who understood private equity, and they were shopping around and they hadn't found anybody who kind of got what they were about. And I had just joined Bain Capital, and they came to Bain Capital because I was there, and we did that deal very differently because they said, how it usually works, right? In private equity, frequently you take a majority share, and Bain Capital owns the company, or at least controls the company, and the founder, if the founder stays, has cashes out or cashes some of it out. And he made the case, it's really important that this company is a Black-owned company, that we be a 51. And he talked about it from the perspective of the customers, where we were in the market, and so on. And I remember that conversation with the investment committee. I was brand new, and they'd never done a deal like this. And I said, "Look, here's his point and why." And I made that case, and we did that investment at 49%. And we had an amazing partnership, and exited ultimately in a way that, certainly makes him and his family set up for life. And what did they do alongside us? With some of the proceeds, we created a fund to invest in women, minority startups. And he runs that now. So I've learned a bunch of things, but I guess the point is, that there's a right way and a wrong way to do everything. And to the point I was making earlier about, I think to Matt, we should never leave our consciences at the door. I think that's my next gig calling.
So let me thank you, Governor Diane, for joining us. Governor, thank you very much. Our purpose in having this speaker series is to show students and the Tufts community role models of public leadership, and as well as humility, optimism, and that we are all students. And you have been a wonderful beginning of our series this year. And I just thank you so much for being with us and for your friendship. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us.
Be well, everyone.
Bye now.